Today's episode of Running It Back is here. It's ready. You're gonna love it. This is Running It Back. I am Patrick Ramirez. This is my show. This is my YouTube series. For those of you who don't know me, I am a stand-up comedian. I live here in Los Angeles, California. I perform all over, but I also have this show where I interview people who are also comedians, people who have other professions, other walks of life. Somewhere along the range, I have crossed paths with them, and I interview them. We get into it. We dive deep into their lives, their profession, their view of the world as well. If you're new to the series, you'll see from the previous shows and episodes that there's a wide range. I hope you check it out, and today is no different. Before we get to the episode, 2 chances to see me live doing stand-up. One this month, April 24th at Brewyard Beer Company. I am doing a stand-up comedy show, 7 p.m. Special show. It's comedy, but it's also karaoke. Every comic does a set. Every comic does a karaoke song. I've never done this show before, so it should be a lot of fun. It should be interesting, and boy, have I put a lot of thought into my song choice. Not only that, May 21st, 9 p.m., Flappers Comedy Club. You can see me there as well. Information for both you can get right from me or on their website. So come out and see me doing stand-up comedy, maybe a little bit of singing. Hope to see you there. If you come out and you listen to the show, let me know that as well. Always love to hear that. Today on the show, joining me, Tommy Rico. Tommy is a stand-up comedian right here in Los Angeles, but he is the host of a new podcast called Turnbuckles, a deep dive into the world of professional wrestling. It's a weekly show where he and 2 other co-hosts break it all down, kind of like what I do here. I've known Tommy for a while. We've done stand-up shows together, so we talk about him starting stand-up, him coming back into stand-up, his love of wrestling as well. I think you'll see, as in most of these interviews, that we uncover a couple of gems in these interviews. We dive deep, and Tommy is a great guest because he shares points of his life, his evolution in stand-up, and where he wants to go with it as well. Great guest, great insight, and from a lay person like myself, getting into wrestling and his show, he breaks it all down in a great way. I think you're really going to like listening to him. So, without further delay, here is Running It Back with me and Tommy Rico. Here we go. All right, joining me today on Running It Back, Tommy Rico, comedian and also host of the Turnbuckles podcast. Episode 3 is out right now. I just listened to it. Tommy, how are you? I haven't seen you on in 18 months exactly now going
I know.
on?
It's crazy. Hello, Patrick, and hello to your viewers and listeners. I am very excited to see you because you are a very genuinely nice person, which is so rare in a community of trash bags like stand-up comedy. So I really appreciate that. I always enjoy working with you, and hope that eventually that we're now reaching the kind of after times of COVID that hopefully I'll be out there soon after, we wanted to get this podcast off the ground, and I want to be back out there by the summertime. So I'm not getting any younger. So it's time. This is kind of like my last run. I have to kind of sprint for the end. And I'm turning 48 in the spring. And that's, I've always liked older stand-ups. So I am one now. And hopefully it was just, I wasn't good enough when I was too young for it. I was kind of always older. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about age, I'm 41 myself, and
we're going to cut all that out, right? Because this is LA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll cut out, especially the part about being nice.
Yeah, that has to go. But I there's a joke I could never get to work, and I just kept telling it with such like earnestness, and I think it's clever, but it never worked. Is that I'm an LA 6? That's right. I'm 6 years older than I tell everyone I am. and I could never ever get it to work. I think it's just too inside baseball, but I
There's
constantly heard like LA 6 and LA 7 jokes that weren't nearly that together. They're all like you're not an anywhere 6. What are you talking about?
It's so weird. Speaking with age, I heard someone joke and said, I've been lying about my age so long, I don't even know which lie I'm telling anymore. I don't even know which lie of the age I am anymore. It's an
Yeah,
interesting town, Los Angeles, because I've lived in a bunch of cities. I'm not sure about you, but I've lived in Los Angeles. And there's definitely a certain level of stress, or call it anxiety, that is just built into you. And it makes for a weird living, I guess you would say, living situation. And I don't know if everybody has it, or people like us who are trying to get into the entertainment industry more and more, but it adds a level of stress that I don't think ever goes away. You know, when you like try and go to sleep and you can't go to sleep because you're worried about the alarm going off, or you're worried about the day following. That's the feeling that I can equate it to, is just a level of uneasiness that I don't know if it ever goes away. Maybe just lessens. And in some people, it seems like that never bothers them ever. And some people, it seems like they are completely consumed with it.
Yeah,
But
there's
it is a
there's a middle
day-to-day thing.
ground that you can live in. I mean, you don't have to
I believe
be
so.
like you don't have to be in a living a complete lie, and you also don't have to be in a complete panic. Like there's definitely a comfortable middle to be in. And for stand up, luckily, stand up is an art form that it doesn't really have an age to it, and you can make it later in life. It's fortunate because there's very few performance arts where that's the case. Most of the time, your skills will actually diminish as you get older instead of getting better. And I think that most stand-ups do get better with age and time. But I was definitely obsessed with it before I got here. Like I started out in Boston, and I spent a couple years in Texas. And so for the first 11 years of my career in Boston, I was scared because I started at 25, which is late. Like a lot of comics just start straight out of high school. Some start before they leave high school. And
Hmm.
I just wasn't that guy. I had a lot of emotional problems and baggage I had to deal with before I could even try to do stand up. And then I had a whole bunch of it that I dealt with while I was starting to do stand up. So
Yeah.
it took me, my learning curve's always been slower for stuff. And it took me probably about 2 years to be good enough to even be considered for work. And
Hmm.
then only as a host or an opening act or a guest spot, and then I'd say about like year 7 or 8, all of a sudden things started to click and I was a lot more smooth with my presentation, kind of figuring out what I thought I wanted to be, which now looking back on that's hilarious. But I kind of had a more defined vision of what I wanted from stand up, and I started to book more work. But I should have left
Yeah.
then, and I ended up staying a little too long. Uh,
Well, you always
I
end
was
up staying a
trying to
little
move.
too long.
Yeah, I was trying to move to LA like my whole life, and I didn't do it until I was 37. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, but I'm glad I spent the time in Texas. I spent the first 11 years in Boston, which is a very storied comedy community. And then I
Right.
moved to San Antonio, which is South Texas. And there was a ton of work down there for people who could be flexible. So if you could go clean, or if you could go longer, if you were more than a featured act, if you could maybe stretch to 45 in a pinch and, headline a bar show or headline a small theater. I started to do work like that. And then I came out here thinking I was ready, and boy, was I not. This scene punched me in the face because it's both better and worse than you expect. Like LA, when you get here, you see people that are just the shittiest of the shit, just the worst of the worst at the bottom. And they're horrible to each other and they're horrible to you. And it's so uncomfortable in the mic scene and at the lower rungs. And then the people up top are so good that it's like terrifying. So
Right.
you have to kind of calibrate yourself and lower your expectations and raise your game. And that, I mean, just settling into LA took me like 5 years.
It
And
really, yeah, it's a good way of putting it. It's so vast, just the geography alone. You have to learn geography, you have to learn a new city, and then you're essentially fighting for your life every night on a stage,
yep.
and you've got that stress of it all. It's kind of weird to describe, but if you were to say the best and brightest comedians and creative types and performers are in Los Angeles, that's definitely true. But think of the movie Top Gun. What if you went to Top Gun, but not only the best were there, but also the worst were there?
Yep.
It's the
It's just
broadest net. You
planes
know,
crashing to each other into each other on the tarmac and
right.
people
Some
shooting each other in the face by accident.
someone can't get their hatch closed. It's just a total mess. Well, let me go way back though, Tommy. Where are you
Sure.
from? You're from Boston?
Yep. I'm originally from a little town called Stoneham, Massachusetts. And then when I graduated high school, I moved to Boston and I lived there for the rest of my time there. I moved out of Boston when I was 35. It's a great comedy scene. I mean, it's a lot of legendary players over the years have come out of Boston. Um, I was like a generation removed from Dane Cook, Bill Burr, Robert
Hmm.
Kelly. Those guys all had kind of already moved when I started. I started doing stand up in 99. And so pre 9/11, I started doing stand up and I
Hmm.
started at a little alt club, the Comedy Studio in Harvard Square, which is now a good major club and it's a player in Boston. Some of the best voices that you've heard out of Boston have come from there. When I started out, I would regularly see and some of them had already moved but had ties to New England, so would come back and visit family and then stop by the Comedy Studio. Gary Gulman, Mike Birbiglia,
Yeah.
Jen Kirkman, Eugene Merman was still living there. And I think he lives there again, but like Eugene Merman of Bob's Burgers, Brendan Small of Metalocalypse. So there was this really cool alt community, and I really didn't fit in. I was more of a mainstream comic, and I
Hmm.
kind of, because I didn't really have a defined perspective of what I wanted to do in stand up, I just kind of, you do your impression of what stand up comedy is for the first couple years, and then you
Yeah.
start to kind of figure things out. But my mentor, Rick Jenkins, who's the owner and the founder of the Comedy Studio, yeah, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten and could give anyone is the clearer definition of what you want out of life, the quicker you'll get to it. And I had like no definition. I want to do stand up. That's not
Yeah.
enough. Like you have to have a lot. You have to figure things out. And I just wasn't there mentally yet.
Sounds
Um,
like one of like the most insightful pieces of advice followed by, yeah, how do I do that? it's
it
it's
really
kind
is.
of it's
It's
kind
a
of like my old
mindset.
saying of I'd be really great with money as long as I had a lot of it.
Yeah.
It's just very difficult to find out what exactly your perspective is. I mean, it's a journey that maybe we never fully finish, but that is what being human is. So you're
Yeah.
growing up in Boston. You always, what were you like as a kid? Did you always want to be a performer? Did you have other interests as well?
No, I wanted to be a performer. I mean, the
Really?
two things, and I've married them now in my later life. The two things I wanted to be was a professional stand-up comedian or a professional wrestler, one or the other. And I'm not a tremendously
Wow.
big
So
guy.
you did have the direction, you did have the
I
need
did.
defined.
I hate to say it because he's a dirty word in the comedy community and should be, but I watched Bill Cosby himself when I was 8 years old, and that was it. I was hooked. That's all I ever wanted to do.
Oh, really? At eight
Yeah.
years old?
Yep. I saw Bill. I mean, it's Bill Cosby, so it wasn't particularly dirty. There's a chunk up front in the stand up special where he talks about drugs a little bit, but there's
Hmm.
no cursing or anything. So my parents were okay with me watching it, and then I would sneak stand up here and there, more dirty stand up. And I was just obsessed with it, absolutely obsessed with stand up and comedy. I would stay up all hours of the night watching Carson and Letterman and Arsenio and SNL. I couldn't get enough SNL, which is funny because I'm not particularly great at sketches.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a competent actor, but I'm not comfortable acting in a space where I can't see the scene outside of the people in it. You know what I'm saying? Like
Uh-huh.
when I act, I'd rather be in costume, in character. Everybody's in character. The scene is set. It looks like
Mm.
it's supposed to. When a space is empty for me, I'm just like, what is this shit? Like I'm one of those guys that I don't have that vivid an imagination, I guess, for sketch.
Huh.
But yeah, so that's all I ever wanted to do, and I just wasn't mature enough to chase those dreams until 25. I had a nervous breakdown at 25. I had a major breakup. My high school sweetheart and I broke up at 20 when I was 25. And
Hmm.
that it changed and shifted everything. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, if not now, when? And I just started chasing it. And the chase took longer because I was so immature and because I wasn't really there are a lot of steps I had to take to mental wellness before I really like. I feel like now at 48 almost, and it 22 years in, I feel like now's the best time I've ever had. I feel very
Yeah.
calm. I feel very at peace with my life. I have a good life, and I want to be able to do stand up with a fresh perspective. But little pandemic got in the way, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And that's something that I had to also be at peace with. Like that couldn't be helped. That
Well,
happened, and it is
certainly
what it
with
was.
comedy and with life, there are outside forces that are just completely beyond your control, and
Yep.
how you react to that and how you adjust to that is really the talent in itself. I want to drill down on something you've mentioned. You've said a few times that you didn't feel you were mature early on. You didn't feel you were mature enough at that 25. What do you mean by that? What were you like previous 25 years old? What kind of kid were you?
Well, very late in life, I have figured out. So I've been in and out of therapy for years, and I believe in therapy. Not every therapist is for you. You have to kind of shop around, which was something I wasn't a big fan of. But late in life, I figured out, oh, I had undiagnosed ADHD all this time. That sure explains a lot.
Yeah.
So
What does that mean?
ADHD.
How does that manifest itself in your
So
life?
ADHD really it helps to uh, pile unnecessarily and stack problems on top of each other until they're a mountain that crushes you. So it is both like a trigger of depression and a cause of depression. It's just it when you can't function because your ADHD is so bad, it feels like just general anxiety or depression, which I also have. But
Hmm.
it took a therapist whose son had ADHD to really kind of point out, okay, well, this is what you've missed, and she had to really kind of like lead me with a trail of crumbs to the fact that I'd been suffering from ADHD so long, and it explains so much because I couldn't finish projects. That's why stand up was perfect for me, is because we all just like scribble a joke down when we get an idea.
Hmm.
I don't know how many stand-ups sit down and have a structured time to write. I know a lot of stand-ups say they do. I wonder if that's true. I think a
Yeah.
very small percentage, other than pros, other than people that have like writing jobs, I think very few stand-ups actually have a structured writing process. They jot things down in a notebook, and then when they have a few minutes to collect their thoughts, they might go in and edit. I think most of us are like that. And
Hmm.
there's a handful of like really rigid, structured people that can do it and sit down and go, okay, I'm going to write jokes for a half hour, or I'm going to write jokes for an hour. But a lot of that bullshit, that write stuff, I see people pushing that write narrative. And it's like, okay, but why every time I see you on stage, why are you talking to the front row? Like, what are you, there's something missing. There's a lot
Yeah,
of bullshit in our community. There's a lot of like,
there is.
preaching to the choir where you're like, I don't see this as something that you're following. Like it's
Yeah.
very easy to say things. It's a lot harder to do them. And I'm somebody that, because I have a high bar for my jokes, I just don't write as many as most people. I throw
Hmm.
away a lot of stuff because if I feel it's even like half-assed and I can't get it to full-assed, it's gone. It's going in the trash.
Hmm.
I don't have patience for anything that's not going to work soon enough. That's why, like, I have a pretty good hit rate when I go to do new material. I'd say I'm probably at about 75-25 as far as works doesn't work. But it's because I throw so much away. It's because there's so many ideas that for whatever reason, I can't get to the point where they're going to be funny enough. And
Hmm.
sometimes I'll leave them. Sometimes it's just a matter of like fresh eyes. And you put it away, you leave it in a notebook that you don't look at for a while. You open it back up and you're like, oh, I see why this was funny. And I see how I could fix it now. But I mean, to stare at a piece of paper until your forehead bleeds to try to get a joke that doesn't work to work. Nah, fuck that. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Nobody should have time
I
for
don't think
that.
anybody should
One to the
have time.
next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you'll find as you re-enter the comedy scene, nothing has changed.
Oh,
it's
yeah. It never
it's still a,
does.
you
It
know,
never
you
does.
mentioned like, the preaching to the choir of, writing, writing, writing. The opposite is true, where you have the comics say like, we're all degenerates, right? We all just, we do bad stuff. We stay out stay out all night. It's like, yeah, you heard that, and thus you want to do that. You
Yep.
already wanted. Now you've just painted it with this veneer that you're a comic. I like this one. I like the comic that has the huge notebook and they're writing in it all the time. and they do the same set every night. I'm like, what
Yep.
are you writing in that
Yep.
book? What could possibly be in there? I've seen you do the same 3 minutes for the last 4.5 months. You have a notebook full of God knows what.
There was a very long period of time where one of the hottest properties in comedy, one of the biggest like tropes was, I'm a piece of shit. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you couldn't be a piece of shit. Like you could maybe work on that. But there's so many comics that were just doing that stuff, and it's gross to me. Like it used to be. I remember the first comic I can remember like really being good at that style was like Jim Norton. He was one of those guys, and Doug Stanhope. But like, look at that bar. You have to be at least that good to do those jokes. And if not, you're just a piece of shit telling the audience you're a piece of shit and then walking off stage wondering why they don't like you. Well, because you don't like you. Why should we like you?
Yeah.
That's another funny thing. The industry pushes that.
I like the one where the comic tells a joke, nobody laughs, and they say, well, I like that joke. My response is always, well, I'm glad you like it because we hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Like, or I always like the comedy adage when someone tries to be deep and they say, like, stand-up comedy saved my life. And I'm like, well, it's ruining the rest of ours. So we need to think of some sort of healthy balance here. Stop saying comedy saved your life. Also,
and comedy's not therapy. Therapy is therapy.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Stand-up is addictive behavior. It really is. Like if used improperly, stand-up is like any other addictive behavior. It's just another dragon to chase. And it's not therapy. You can, there's a perfect example, and we're supposed to have him as a guest soon on the podcast, is Gary Gulman. Gary Gulman, I've known Gary forever. New England kid. I started working with him. He was already very well entrenched in the comedy scene and had moved to New York and had management by the time I met him and started working with him. Gary's always been funny, but after his journey to wellness, after his journey with therapy and with medicine, and the Great Depression is one of the best comedy specials I've ever seen. Gary got a chance to take his genius and enjoy it himself, which I don't think he'd ever done. He was so critical, hypercritical of what the things that he did. He put out a special on Netflix that was, the first time that he had that kind of large audience, because he'd been on TV and such before. But that Netflix special he put out before Great Depression, that was pretty big. And a lot of people got to know him from that special. And Gary dropped off the map for like a year after that, for whatever. That should have been like a big win for him. And he couldn't see it that way. But he's a great guy. I haven't talked to Gary in forever. I'm really looking forward to having him on our podcast. But he's a perfect example of like, you don't have to be broken to do this. Like you can be fixed and be better. Like you can at least try. And I'm still, it's a lifetime work. You're never going to stop. You always have to, if you have, some cognitive impairment of whatever kind, and I have a couple of them, you got to work on it, because untreated, it's just going to eat you alive, and it's going to take everything down in your life with you.
What was your getting back to the therapy and the ADHD stuff? What did you find worked for you? Was it a medication thing? Did you change your mindset? How did you find that you made improvements of it, and how did it help you get out of the current state?
I found a therapist who could identify my issues and present them in a way that I could digest them. But then also, as the pandemic started to roll on, about 6 months in, there was no amount of coping skills that I had built were helping. I was stuck, and I was in a real bad way. I was depressed, and I was lost. I was unmoored. And I had an experience about 15 years prior where I had a brief hospitalization. It was my nervous breakdown. And so I took some heavier drugs during that. They had to get me to sleep. I hadn't slept in like 3 weeks. And if you do that long enough, your body will shut down and you'll die. So they had to get me to sleep. So they gave me like trazodone and Klonopin, and they kind of knocked me out with some stuff. And then the doctor, the head of the floor, the psychiatric wing, he said, you're not a real good
comic. What a fucked up doctor.
There you go. No, you're not a good candidate for medicine. It's not going to work for you. The things that we saw, we didn't like, as far as like when we gave you the meds. So this is going to suck, but you're going to have to deal with this on your own, and it's going to be a process. I think you're strong enough to do it. And I kind of just took that as gospel, but that was a long time ago. And so, you know, a lot of the drugs that are out there now, they're not nearly as heavy as the stuff that they had to put me on to get me to sleep. So I ended up going on Lexapro, on a little dose of Lexapro. And like they tell you, it takes a few weeks to kick in. And I started noticing right away. I started noticing within the first couple of days, like, oh man, I can't believe I lived like that before. My depression was so bad. I had psychosomatic aches and pains all over.
Yeah.
And I just assumed like I used to be a bodybuilder. I've had all kinds of torn muscles and I'm a mess physically. And I just assumed it was that. And no, as soon as I started taking the medication, all of a sudden, all those aches and pains started to go away. And like, oh man, that was in my head. And I couldn't believe it. It was so profound to me. That was the first, you know, time I realized, hey, you were in rougher shape than you thought. And then so the Lexapro, it's funny. It's like they call it the headliner drug in the community because it seems like every comedy headliner is on it.
Yeah.
But it's been good for me.
What a middle axe take.
Beer. But yeah, no, I've had tremendous success with it, and no medication is one size fits all, but that's helped a lot. And it's helped me be more productive. And there is kind of you know, I have this desire to go back to do stand-up mostly because like, I want to see what my brain is like right now. I want to see because the podcast is so much easier for me to do. Like the podcast has happened now post-medication. And so now that I'm taking the meds and I'm doing the podcast, I can do it calmly. And I don't have to be like this psycho just sitting on the edge of my seat waiting to get my stuff in. Like I can just kind of sit back and let everybody talk and jump in. I hate crosstalk. Nothing drives me nuts more than a podcast where there's like 20 jackasses all screaming at the same time. It's white noise to me, and usually quite literally. I can't stand that. So when we put together this 3-person panel and we're going to do some interviews now after the first few weeks, I was concerned because I don't like crosstalk, but we're kind of finding our voice. Like this week felt a lot more comfortable. And so I dig the people I'm working with. I'm working with one of my best friends and a new friend in Julie, who's terrific. And so it's easy for me to go, okay, we're all funny and we all have something to say. And I don't have to be sitting like waiting to throw my punchline in there. Like I can just kind of sit back, and I find that I'm funnier when I just allow myself the freedom to not have to be funny every fucking second. And that is a real, like when you can get to that level of calm, because I was a decent stand-up before, but one of the things that really plagued me, and it plagued me all the way up until, you know, the last performance I had, was I needed that laugh. And because I needed it so badly, I would occasionally flub a punchline or mispronounce a word or mistime it, or I was, you know, just such a crackhead for the laugh that I couldn't quite get it to work. I needed everything to work perfectly for the set to go well. Yeah. And life just doesn't work that way. It doesn't. I mean, someone's going to drop a dish. Someone's going to get up and go to the bathroom. There's always going to be something. And I got better at like reacting to that stuff, but I never allowed it to just roll off me. It always would bother me. Even if I reacted well to something, it would be like, why can't this all work easily? And it's just, and that feeling, I don't feel like you can be a great stand-up until you can kind of get out of that zone.
Like you said, in your awakening of turning the corner, was it just Lexapro that helped? Was it hearing those words from the doctor that also opened the door for you? Was there any lifestyle changes you made? Or was the combination of hearing the words like, you're going to have to deal with this on your own, and finding a working medication? Or did anything else contribute to you working better with yourself like that?
Well, I don't drink, and I haven't for a long time, but I used to. And especially my first few years in stand-up, I used to drink an embarrassing amount. And like,
really, I don't see you as a drinker. That's odd.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm from Boston, and all my best friends were all like 220-pound Irish guys who can drink until the cows come home. Yeah. And I'm not that. And so I would try to go beer for with these guys. And especially in stand-up, like I'm somebody that, like, I was a working kid. I had a full-time job. In some cases, I had two while I was doing stand-up as well. Stand-up, which just wasn't paying the bills. There was only 2 years of my career where stand-up was a living. And that was in Texas because there was so much work that you could get. And a lot of it was on the road and a lot of it didn't pay a lot, but it was enough where I like having a day job was a detriment to travel and I could make enough where I didn't need it. But in Boston, I mean, Boston, the big paying gigs were few and far between. Every now and then you'd get a college or a private gig, but for the most part, you needed a job. And so I was always working and I brought my bad habits with me into stand up. And there were frequently nights where, and by the way, this wasn't 25, 26, this was like 25 through 35. Like until I met my wife, I was a mess. And there would be nights where like I'd wake up on a Wednesday with the worst hangover I've ever had. And I just reach over and grab my wallet and open my wallet and see a receipt. And the receipt would be like a $98 bill at a dive bar. And I'm like, I spent $98 at the worst bar in Boston on a Tuesday. What's wrong with me? And then I do it again on Wednesday. Like and I never drank at home.
Like, all right, just $85 on Wednesday.
Yeah. I never had alcohol at home and I never drank alone. I was a social drunk, but that was mostly because I had such anxiety. I had such social anxiety and such fear. And so I was constantly drinking just to kind of throw some armor on and pretend. And so I stopped drinking right before I got married. And that was a great choice. So I don't drink. I don't do drugs. This is what I do, like stand up and this professional wrestling podcast. That's what I love to do. So I don't really have vices to speak of. So that helps. But with me, I had really, because I'd had a long run with therapy and because I've had the same therapist for a couple of years and continuity helps when you find the right person. I had built a lot of coping skills. I just couldn't use them. They were just like they were already tenuous at best because my condition was worse than I thought. And then the pandemic just, sunk me like a rock to the bottom of the lake. And so that, I had the skills. I just needed to be able to tap into them. And I just couldn't because the depression was so bad.
Yeah. I'm seeing more and more the roadmap as you describe it. It seems like you are very affected by everything on the outside. Like you said, the laughs, you want to get the words right. You want to get the laughs right. You don't want the set to be obstructed by anything. And then, like you said, you're affected by outside stuff. It makes sense that the drinking would help to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, would it help to numb the senses a bit? And then put on top of it that it is a social practice as well. It's in the scene. It almost feels like times I've gone way too far with the drinking in clubs. It almost feels like this is part of the life. This is like, we're all having fun. We're all doing comedy. We're all in the bar. Let's all drink. And it kind of like becomes part of the job essentially. And you can see the roadmap for like, oh, I see how people go down this road and never come back. It's
Los Angeles, I will say there's an interesting dynamic in that when you start to meet the top players, they're not drinking and drugging at the clubs. They're not, because they're protecting their brand. You don't see them messing up. And there's also like, I've noticed that the smartest people in the scene, the people that have gotten the most out of the scene, are the ones that don't. Because what happens is if you're trashed at a club, sitting, you're at the Improv and you're sitting outside on the patio and you're drunk and you're talking with your buddy and you're talking too loud and you're talking trash about a comic, and that comic's manager is 4 feet away from you at the other table. Well, you're fucked. That's it. They're going to remember.
Were you eavesdropping on me last Tuesday? What the hell?
Exactly. I absolutely cannot picture that out of you. But people protect their brand out here. Now, is there a large share of messes? Sure. And there is some comfort in that, like, there are cliques and there are people that feel that they're comfortable with their friends and they'll get trashed with their friends. It's just a bad idea. And because LA is a driving town, it's not a real commuter town. I mean, you got to be real careful with that stuff. I mean, this is not a scene where you should be getting loaded every night. Like, it's one of those things that, like, if you're taking an Uber home and you're in polite company and there's no danger in it, sure. But if you're at one of the big clubs I mean, it doesn't even have to be a weekend, on any night of the week, you got to watch your words. You got to, mind who you talk to and what you say. And you shouldn't be, staggering around like a drunk. I mean, people see that shit, and eventually that'll get to someone that can help you, and they won't.
Yeah, the downside far outweighs any positive side of what could happen.
Yeah.
Growing up, what did your parents do?
So my mom is an immigrant from Cuba. She came over in the 60s. My dad is an Italian guy from Everett, Massachusetts, came from a
Mm,
working class family. So he was a family of plumbers, and he was the first to go to college. He became a civil engineer. So I grew up with my parents in Stoneham, which so they moved us out of the city when we were 5 years old. I lived in Everett, which is kind of an industrial city. It was where a lot of immigrants lived. For a while, it was the Irish and the Italians. And eventually, now these days, it's like Brazilians and Dominicans live there. And so, but my father had dreams that like the suburbs were the place to move. And so
yeah.
he's like, I got to get out of the city. And meanwhile, if we had lived in the city, like the social services there were better. The schools were better. He moved us out to
Huh.
what he thought was like the big time, like, oh, I'm moving to the suburbs. And he moved us to a town that was just like loaded with, mafia guys and, want to be drug dealers, like people who wanted to work for Whitey Bulger. And so I grew up in a little town that didn't seem like much, but I grew up with some real trash. I grew up with some people that if you Googled them, it would chill you to the bone. I grew up with, some like murderers, plural, and, drug dealers and just crazy, crazy stuff. So
That
I did
cannot be
not have
helpful for the for the
no,
HDHD, Tommy.
no, not at all. Well, and I got bullied mercilessly because I'm Latino. My mom, people always ask like, well, you can present as white. Well, like, yeah, but they find out. They find out. Somebody,
Wow, I'm the complete opposite.
yeah. Well,
People
somebody, you give a kid a ride home and they're like, oh, your mom has an accent. Where's your mom from? Oh, she's from Cuba. And the kid never has a problem with it until they go home and tell dad. And then they tell dad, oh, yeah, then dad, Tommy's mom's from Cuba. And then you get the shit kicked out of you the next day. And so
yeah.
I was just like taking live rounds every day of my childhood. I mean, I got the crap knocked out of me constantly. It was a brutal process to just get through childhood. And then when I got through, and that's why wrestling was such an outlet for me. Wrestling and stand up made me want to be funny. And so when I became funny, that's a shield. That's a form of like, okay, if I can make them laugh, they're not going to punch me. And then watching wrestling, it was like watching these guys just, doing these incredible moves and these bodybuilder types. And so that made me want to like work out and become a bodybuilder. At some point I was pretty big. At my biggest,
What did you get? What was your weight and stuff when you got to your biggest?
My biggest, I was about 220. And
really? How tall are you again?
I'm 6 foot tall, just about. I'm 6 foot on a good hair day. I'm one of those deceptive 6 feet tall people because I hunch a lot. My posture has actually gotten better over the years, but like I got measured by a nurse one time and she's like, you 6 feet? I'm like, if you say so. And she's like, let me measure you again. Like she didn't believe it. And she measured me again. She's like, I don't know how, but you are. And I'm like,
wow.
So I'm 6 foot tall on a good day, but like, I'm not a real big framed guy. So like my natural weight is about 175. I'm a little heavier than that now, but yeah, to get to 220, like my metabolism, I had to eat at the gym. Like I'd be working out and like eating power bars and stuff. It was ridiculous.
Oh, power bars. That takes me back.
It was too
vanilla crisp.
It was that like chalky taste.
They were so chalky and dry.
I was so obsessed with getting big that I'd do anything to get like I would drink as many nasty shakes as I had to, eat bars, and just I ate like an animal. And I got real big and real strong. And I had a car accident when I was 20 years old. I got hit. Head-on collision. I was going through a green light, and not a fresh green light, by the way. This was a green light that had been green for a while. And I'm driving through, and a lady at full speed ran the red and just nailed me. And I was driving a Dodge Shadow, which is like this little tiny car. The entire front end of the car was accordioned into the dashboard. And so it knocked me out. And I was like, I had a like 17 and a half inch neck. I was big. And so I must have hit the airbag. I don't remember any of this. I woke up. So
how old were you when this happened?
I was 20. So there was an EMT eating at the Dunkin' Donuts across the street, because of course there was a Dunkin' Donuts across the street from the accident. So he came out And luckily this EMT was like a guardian angel. He came out, and because hadn't even shut off the car yet. Like I just had my foot jammed into the brake, and so the dashboard's smoking and I'm a wreck. And so this EMT came over and he helped me out, and he checked on the lady, and he's like, he comes back to me. He's like, the lady's freaking out. She thinks she killed you. I'm like, oh, good. Like I was just like, it was just one of those things where like, I was so out of it, but also still a wise ass. And
go back and tell her I'm dead
yeah.
and see how she reacts.
So they took me away. They took me away on the sandwich board. I go to the hospital and they show me, so they take all the x-rays and everything. I was in a lot of pain, and they showed me the x-ray of my back, and my back, it looked like if you x-rayed a snake. It was just my spine was, you could tell it wasn't where it should be. And the doctor goes, he's like, I don't know how you didn't die, but you are a lucky person. He said, the impact from you hitting the airbag was so significant that it sent a chain reaction down your spine, and your spine is fine. He's like, there's no fractures. There's no herniation. I've never seen anything like this. Your spine is okay. But the connective tissue and muscle around your spine has, most of it is, the soft tissue is all torn away. And that's why your spine looks like that. So I had a tremendous rehab process. He told me if I wasn't a musclehead, and I guess everything has a purpose in life. He's like, if you didn't have a thick neck and big shoulders, if you weren't this strong to brace for that hit, you would have either been a paraplegic or dead for sure. Yeah. And so that took away about 6 months of like prime working out time. I never got my strength back. I was real strong at a certain point. I had a parallel squat of over 500 pounds. I could deadlift almost 500. I could bench press over 300. Most of that big power went away, but I found a way to like deal with the back injury and also like get back in shape, because I really did want to be a wrestler.
Yeah. Well, so much trauma has happened to you, Tommy. Take this in the spirit in which it's intended. I'm surprised you only have one mental disorder.
I know. Well,
you should have more.
I do have a few, but they're like Pokemon. I've tried to collect them all. But I'm very fortunate in that a lot of these things, had I not addressed them, they would have taken me down. The alcoholism for sure. And that was, I think I was lucky in that I wasn't a physical dependent, that I was a social dependent on alcohol. I never really desired or craved it. And I still don't. Like, you can waft a beer under my nose and it'll set off like memories, but it won't, there's no desire. I don't want that.
See.
So yeah, I that was probably, of all the things that I've done, that was probably the easiest thing to do. And the wisest, because I've been married now for 10 years, and that's not an accident after a year of quitting drinking before I married my wife.
Well, it seems like you've certainly done the work on yourself to make that change, turn that corner. Before we get to the wrestling side of things, you getting back into stand-up though right now, what are you looking forward to, and what scares you about getting back into it? What do you think? You're saying you want to go back midsummer, get back on stage and stuff. What are you looking forward to right off the bat, and what are you apprehensive about?
I'm looking forward to using the new brain, that's for sure, because I mean, so much of the things that made me less than great. And I think, I mean, I wouldn't argue that I was a bad stand-up. I don't think that's accurate. I think I was good. I think I was skilled. I put in the work. It was just that there was that, I've always had kind of a missing connection with the crowd. On the nights where everything works, sometimes I could connect, and sometimes I could make eye contact, and sometimes I could really feel like that energy of like, I got them and they get me, but it was not consistent enough. And if I had to go get the audience, if they were disinterested, or if they were distracted, or if they were shitty, whatever the case is, if the audience wasn't already like ready for me, it was always a struggle. And so without that kind of need, I'm interested to see what I'll do. I don't really have fear other than like, I'm really going to start from the bottom. So I have a lot of great connections in the industry. I'm not going to use any of them. I'm literally just going to start from scratch, because I don't want anybody to resent me or feel that I'm trying to skip steps. I'm not going to turn down work, but I'm also like, one thing I've divorced myself from, not hosting for a while. And possibly ever. I got a lot of work as a host in Los Angeles, but I found that the longer that went, the more that was a death sentence, because they really do. Most of the clubs do consider the host to be the worst comic on the show. And they like you to do all the little things. They like you to tell people where the bathrooms are and tell people about the raffle at the end. And they want you to get everything right, but they don't give a shit if you're funny. And that was really starting to hurt, because it like I was continuing to work, but it wasn't getting me anywhere. It was just getting me more hosting work. And quite frankly, I think I'm at the point where I need more than that. And it's also very hard to create an indelible character when you're hosting, because you're in host mode. And so even great stand-ups, when they host, you can tell there's kind of a shift where they're not quite their normal character if they're just doing a set, because they're tailoring it to, okay, I have to say this, and then I have to bring this person up, and I have to keep this energy here. And there's always other jobs to do when you're a host. And I'm at the level now where I know, okay, I enjoy hosting. I'm not going to lie. I do enjoy it. I do like it when the audience is when they're up for the show when it starts, which is very rare. That's another thing too, is that like you're usually just wasting your best stuff at the front, because they're just getting into their seats and getting into the idea that there's a comedy show about to happen, possibly. And so
possibly
you're kind of burning your best shit for no reason. But I just think that like what I need to really solidify my character. It's the one thing that's been missing in the last piece of my journey here in LA. And I want to commit to it. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if someone brings me on stage and I get that 5 to whatever minutes to tell people who I am, what I am, and try to get them to laugh with my worldview. Can't do that as the host. And I'm not saying never, but at least for the first year, I'm just going to try to grab as many spots as I can and try to work out my character and not host shows, because it would be so easy to just fall back into that trap. And I can't. It's just, it really, it was like 5 years of spinning my wheels as a competent host. And I think everybody was happy with my work, but I got very little else from it. And that hurt.
It's definitely a different muscle. It's almost as if a running back says like, hey, how come I don't get to play quarterback? It's that different of a role. And some people are very, very good at it, and some people should never host ever.
No.
And some people learn. They kind of learn, here's the good parts that can come out of it, and here are the disadvantages that come out of it. And from what you described, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost as if a comedy show had a maitre d', and they're showing you where the table is, describing the specials on the menu, and then the comics are the entrees of it. There's different ways you can approach it. I definitely see that angle that you're presenting is like, hey, I want XYZ, and if I'm in this role, then that is not going to be to my best abilities.
Yeah. There's one thing I will miss from it. I will miss the connection. It's like you meet so many people when you host shows, and it's how I met you. There's so many good people I've met. There's a lot of trash I've met as well. There's a lot of people that I wish I'd never met, that like people, you have to delete from your social media because they're insane. But for the most part, like you get to meet a lot of people that way. And I'm still somebody who loves stand-up. Like, as I got my opinion of what stand-up is and what I want from stand-up and what I like in stand-up, but I still love sitting down and watch a show and just going in with an open mind and watching a bunch of comedians and letting somebody win me over. I'm not somebody that just sits there and folds my arms like, this sucks, and that person sucks, and I want this stage time, and why are they up there? I should be up there. I don't feel that way. I really want a show to always be good. I don't want to be on shit shows. And unfortunately, when you do showcase work, you're going to be on some shit shows, because if there's 10 people on the lineup, at least 5 of them are not going to be up to snuff. But I really love to sit and watch a show and let a new comic that I've never seen before just dazzle me. That really I still get so excited when I see someone that I've never seen before just blow me away with how great they are.
Yeah. The potential of being surprised on a show, I don't think ever goes away. You never know what you're going to see. You never know when you're going to be just like, wow, you'd be like, who was that guy? Who was that girl? The crowd was dead. They brought him back. Or I didn't think the crowd could go higher. They took him higher. You always have that. I think that speaks to just how much we love a performance. And maybe that segues nicely into The wrestling in general. Well, you're doing a podcast called Turnbuckles.
I am.
I've been listening to it, and what piqued my interest in it initially is someone who grew up. I grew up in a weird outsider sport. I grew up cycling. I raced bikes since I was about 15 years old, well into my 30s. I wanted to be a pro. I raced all over the country, and I was constantly justifying the sport, explaining the sport. And after listening to it, I feel like there's a lot of similarities between wrestling and other outside sports. Listening to you guys talk, you know the names, you know the terminology, you're speaking of the potentials, the dramas. So take me as a layperson. What do we need to know about wrestling? Give me a state of the union
Sure
about
thing.
wrestling.
I mean, the most common misconception is that wrestling fans don't know it's fake. All right. And that is, nothing could be further from the truth. True wrestling fans all know that it's a work. A work is a worked match is something that is scripted, but it's not as strictly scripted as people believe. A lot of these matches are called in the ring. So these wrestlers, they have their move set. They know what they can do. They know by the size of the other performer, okay, I can do this with them. I can't do that. And they know the finish, which means that they know who's going to win, who's going to go over, who's going to lose the match. But for the most part, a lot of those matches are not nearly as tightly scripted as people believe. A lot of it is all like on the fly. Wrestling is called or pro wrestling is called a catch as catch can sport, meaning that anything can happen because these two people are, there's a lot of variables. And that's why you see accidents. You see people get really hurt because a spot goes wrong. But wrestling fans know it's a work, but we love it because it's a work, because we want to see the drama. There is a drama missing from combat sports that wrestling provides. It provides storylines. And we were talking earlier about how wrestling and stand-up are similar. Wrestling and stand-up are both essentially, you're a version of yourself with the volume jacked up to 11. So you have to be a character, but not quite a character, because if you're too much of a character, it generally isn't going to work. There are exceptions to that, like The Undertaker. But for the most part, the wrestlers who are the biggest stars are a version of themselves in the ring, a fictional version of themselves, just larger than life. And also, like stand-up, it takes you a good decade to get good at wrestling. If you watch wrestling and you see the stars of today, there's a lot of stars that are 38, 39, 40 years old.
Oh,
it
really?
takes you, 10 years to get great at wrestling. So there's time spent in developmental territories. There's time spent in the indies. There's a lot of wrestling around the country and around the world that you have to do before WWE will look your way. And then when they do look your way, not only do you have to be ready, but you have to have a pretty good perspective as far as like, okay, I need to know exactly what I want to be when I get there. Because so many wrestlers have tremendous talent, and then they get to WWE, and maybe creative gives them something that's not great, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to push back. They don't know how to tailor it to themselves, and they end up going out with a dumb character that nobody likes, and then it doesn't work, and then who can they blame for that? Well, you can blame creative so much, because creative gave you these dumb tights or this dumb outfit or some dumb name, but I've seen dumb stuff work. It's all on the performer. And so stand-up is very similar in that you need 10 years to get good. There are the occasional stand-ups and professional wrestlers that are good before their 10th year. Very few. Very few. It's like 1%.
Well, it's become such an industry with billboards, T-shirts and stuff. Everybody knows it's on television. And it seems like it's just grown over the last 10 years, 20 years.
Well, that's another similarity, by the way, to stand-up, is that stand-up and professional wrestling are both relatively inexpensive programming that can have big turnouts. Stand-up is a lot cheaper to produce than professional wrestling, and professional wrestling, especially on the WWE level, is massive and expensive. But for the most part, wrestling on television, when it was first put on in like the 50s, again, it's cheap programming. It's just you get a camera, you put it
Hmm.
at Madison Square Garden, and you got Nature Boy Buddy Rogers and Gorgeous George, and it was a ratings blockbuster for them. So that's why wrestling has always been in our culture since television, is because it was inexpensive programming that they could put on and draw audience.
Someone was saying that, I think this relates to wrestling. They were relating it to boxing, but they were saying the biggest spectacle in the world is always a fight.
Yep.
You could have LeBron James playing one on one with Michael Jordan in the park, or someone can say, two guys are fighting over here. Everybody would go watch the guys fighting because we
100%.
love a fight. And I think wrestling falls into that as well. Do we know where wrestling started? Do we know where it came from? In its current form, I'm sure it evolved, but where did this performance art come from? Do we know?
So apparently, because I've known about it from its carnival roots, but it precedes that. So it
Hmm.
wrestling, professional wrestling kind of started. The genesis of it was in France in the late 1800s. Is like, I guess, in the French Alps, where actually
Wow.
Andre the Giant is from. But yeah, so it started as an art form there, and then it moved to the States. So in the carnival scene, there'd always be a tent. It would be the strong man's tent. So you'd have
Ah.
this big tough guy flexing his muscles, and who could defeat me? And so then somebody from the crowd, well, I can, and then they go and they get destroyed. Generally, that was a work, meaning it was
Huh.
a worked match. It was a fake. It was a plant. So the plant would go in, and they'd get their ass kicked, or they would beat the strong man. It was a worked match, but that kind of drama went on for years in the carnival circuit. And occasion, but the thing was, the strong man, the person making these challenges, if you got a regular person to, somehow, jump the fence or challenge you, or you had to accept the challenge, you had to be tough enough to beat that person. And that's a scary element, in that as you didn't know who this person is. This person could be a fighter, they could be a shooter. Shooting is a real fight, by the way. When you hear the word shoot in wrestling means real. So there are shoot conversations. That is, and generally shooting in wrestling, when you hear a wrestler talking about the real shit, it's usually their version of it. But shooting
Yeah.
is real, and working is quote unquote fake or predetermined.
Oh.
So it moved out of the carnivals, much like stand up did, where so stand up started in vaudeville and started in it started small, and then it moved out of the spaces, the burlesque circuit. It moved out of the small spaces into its own spaces, and that's what wrestling did. Wrestling eventually moved out of the carnival circuit into arenas, and there was a territory system where there were territories all over the country, and WWE was at one point the WWWF. So, and that, yes, that's three W's before the
Hmm.
World Wide Web. So that was Vince McMahon Senior's company. And so that was kind of the big New York company, but there was territories in the South and the Midwest and the Southwest. There was all these different territories, and basically Vince McMahon Jr., who's Mr. McMahon on WWE television, the CEO of WWE, he had a vision that he could unite the territories either by crushing them or buying them out. And he went to each territory in the 80s as he started to amass more power and more money, and Hulkamania was running wild. That he started to have a cash cow in Hulk Hogan that was selling out everywhere, selling out huge arenas. So he started to go to these territories, and he would offer to buy them out, and
Hmm.
almost all of them rejected him, and almost all of them folded. So he actually in good faith went to all these territories like, hey, I want to buy you out. No. And they would, he had death threats and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And eventually he just won by attrition. It was okay. Well, you don't want me to buy you out. I'll see you in the arena over there. Have fun in your little
Uh-huh.
show in the tent. And so that's how he ended up kind of squashing all his competition. He's bought out. He ended up bringing the best talent to the WWE just by throwing out money out there. But for a
Wow.
while, the territory system, there were guys like Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair who would go from like territory to territory. They'd have their main territory that that was their home base, but they would go all over the country and sell out houses all over the place. And it moved from that to now this more structured system where there's a lot of independent wrestling companies, but really there's WWE, which is a major, by on its own, a major media conglomerate. And then there's AEW, which is partnered with Turner Enterprises. So they have their programming on TBS and TNT. And they're a smaller federation, and they're up and coming. So there's some competition, but WWE, I mean, they're competing with movie studios and television studios. They don't look at AEW as competition, and to some degree, they're correct.
Such a rich history. Not even the history alone, the industry of what it is currently is full. I got from that Vince McMahon Sr. invented the internet, and Bill Gates and Microsoft lended their business practices from Vince McMahon Jr. and bought everybody out or crushed them later in the business life.
I will say that WWE, for a company that basically produces an ancient art form, an old product, they were early adopters to the internet. They have been on top of so many different things first. And a lot of the ways that, like, when you watch WWE programming, if you're not up to speed, if you just jump in tomorrow and you just start watching one of their shows, they will tell you what happened last week, and you will be invested in what's happening this week because their vignettes are so good. The way they break down what happened last week and the story they're trying to tell. They've been doing that since the 80s. I mean, nobody puts together a video package better than WWE, and they've been doing it forever. And so many other companies in different places. So, television dramas and sports, so many people have borrowed like camera angles and storylines and how to produce a vignette, how to tell a story, how to bring people back in who maybe missed last week or forgot some of last week. So many people have borrowed stuff that Vince McMahon pioneered. He's a genius, and he's still, I saw an interview with him a few weeks ago. He's still got it. He's still on top of his game. That guy, 76 years old. He doesn't search for words. He's got his code. He's got his way that he lives and what he believes. And, both of my co-hosts on Turnbuckles have worked directly for Vince. And in some cases, like John Reinman, he wrote for WWE and was in meetings with Vince McMahon and has had conversations with him. And it's fascinating to hear their takes on it. WWE has a very kind of, for years now, they've had a writer's room that's very tough to penetrate. You can get a job there and they'll give you a 3-month tryout or a 6-month tryout, but it's very hard to stay in the circle. And it's because it's grueling. There's travel, and it's, they expect a lot of their writers. Their writers have to show up in suits and ties and dresses and heels, and they expect a lot from their talent. But I'm constantly fascinated by the stories that John and Julie bring to the table every week, because I never got to work there. Early on, they were accepting submissions, and a lot of stand-up comedians, especially from the Northeast, because we all grew up with WWF, a lot of comedians wanted to work at WWF and then later WWE, because it seemed like easy money and you get to write crazy stuff. And Patrice O'Neill wrote there for a little while. There have been stand-up. Yeah, for a little while he was there, and he wrote a couple of things that got on TV. And so there's this kind of like through line for comedians in the Northeast and WWE, but so many have not stuck around. But I'm constantly fascinated by the process and the creativity that they use over there. I really wanted to be a wrestler. Again, physically, it wasn't to be, but for a while, MTV had a reality show called Tough Enough. And so Tough Enough
I remember that. Yeah.
So it brought people of different walks of life to a studio to train to be wrestlers. And at the end, they gifted a contract to a male wrestler and a contract to a female wrestler. Very few of these wrestlers stuck around. In fact, each season of Tough Enough, somebody who didn't win ended up like signing a contract later on down the line and actually becoming a star. But the actual winners very rarely went on to do anything. There was a season of Tough Enough that I had a contact at MTV, and they promised me, they're like, I can't guarantee that you're going to get on the show, but I can guarantee they'll see the tape, and you're big and you're strong and you're charismatic. I think maybe you got a shot. And so this was, I was like just massive and strong, and like I really wanted this for myself, but I also used to drink. And when you drink,
You just
and
found your
you
character,
use your
Tommy.
muscles, things can things can fall apart on you. And so one day, I'm training because the next day I had scheduled that I was going to record my video and give it to my contact and have it sent to MTV. And I was doing deadlift and I had 485 on the bar. And I wasn't great at the deadlift ever, but at this size and strength, that was a realistic amount for me. But I was a max, and you really shouldn't do a max ever. I don't. It was one of those muscle head things where it's like, I gotta see how much I can do, and then you're at the hospital like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But so 485 on the bar, and I get it, and I'm halfway up, and I'm stuck, and I'm like, I am not dropping this weight. I would rather die than drop it. And now I'm hanging there, like at kind of a 90-degree angle where I got it. I'm not dropping it and I'm not falling forward, but I gotta try to. So I cheated, kind of assed it backwards, and I tore my right buttock. And so I got it. And the pain, it was like someone had stabbed me in the ass with an ice pick. And I dropped the weight and grabbed my ass and started screaming and ran around the gym like a cartoon character that's had his ass set on fire. Just and so I had a partial tear of my gluteus maximus, and I had to be on the shelf for a few weeks, couldn't work out. And I was like, you know what? If I'm getting hurt for the training video, they're going to kill me in the ring. So maybe this isn't a dream I should pursue anymore. And at the time I had already just started stand up, and I was like, you know what? I'm probably not going to die on stage at stand up in a physical sense.
That was your wrestling origin story, Tommy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a quick one.
Yeah. That take two must've been horrendous. Yeah. How ironic that MTV had a show called Tough Enough about strength, but they also had a show called Remote Control, which taught you how to sit on a couch and change channels.
I loved Remote Control so much.
That was a great show. That was like one of the first shows I watched on MTV.
Do you remember Idiot Savants?
I don't remember that one. What was that?
Idiot Savants was a like a Jeopardy style game show, but it was hosted by comedian Greg Fitzsimmons, who's great. And he was I think he was like 12. It was a long time ago. But so they had one in Panama City, and me and my friend Joe, we figured out where the tryouts were being held, and we could go. And we were staying in Orlando, and we didn't realize how far Panama City is from Orlando. Oh. And we ended up driving there, and we were supposed to get there at noon, and at 4 p.m, we're halfway there. And I don't think we're getting there, but that would have been a lot of fun to do. I loved MTV's programming back then.
Kids don't know that MTV had remember MTV Spring Break?
Yep.
Remember? There was tons of stuff. You would just
Rock and Jock Softball.
Yeah, that was good. There was a time where you would just get home from school and you would just turn on MTV and you just whatever was on, that's what you watched.
Yep.
There was dating shows, there was game shows, and then you watch music videos, of course. People won't understand
I missed that. I realize that makes us sound ancient, but it was good stuff. It's sad because it was kind of it was a catch-all for pop culture that just doesn't exist right now. Pop culture is very segmented, which is fine. Everything is niche now. I mean, even within stand-up and wrestling. Stand-up, there's so many different niches in stand-up that you can hit and have an audience. Again, my friend and mentor Rick Jenkins, he said that he's like they fool you thinking that you need a gigantic audience, that you need everyone to love you. You need 1% of the population to love you. 99% can hate you, but if 1% loves you, that's a couple 100,000 people that you can monetize for the rest of your career. You don't need a giant audience. And that's an unfortunate thing that I think that the industry doesn't really look at that enough. I think that there's a lot of we need this broad, simple comedy. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just need somebody to grab enough attention from enough like-minded people. That's what stand-up is now. Stand-up is not what it was. There's never going to be another Eddie Murphy. Sorry, not going to happen. It's just not. You're never going to find one comedian that penetrates the consciousness of our society. That's just not possible. There's too many options. No, and knowing that and accepting that, okay, well, who are the best at each option? And there are so many.
Yeah. Well, as we get into the podcast, I've listened to the first handful of episodes. One of the
Thank you.
things I like that you do about it, coming from an outsider sport, you don't dumb down the sport for newcomers. I used to get upset with cycling announcers year after year. Cycling during the tour would start to get popular, and then it was on cable, and then you had cable, and then the announcers would effectively explain cycling for the next 3.5 years.
Yep.
I'm like, we get it. We know what drafting is at this point. We know they eat their power bars on the bike. We know it's a 21-day thing. A little respect to the audience. Give the audience a little bit of credit. And I think that's what you guys do, even though I'm a little lost for 25 minutes. But then I start to put the pieces together. And I think that's what people do with the sport when it's presented to outsiders. Is this is how it is in its entirety, and then you become interested in there. There's no need to dumb it down. There's no need to explain it episode after episode, is what I enjoyed about the first couple of episodes. Okay, before we get to the Rotten Tomatoes game, I got one question. Who is the Michael Jordan of wrestling? Is there one name? Is there a few? Is there a Mount Rushmore of wrestlers, or does it even work that way?
I think everyone has a different one. As far as like, if I were to compare anybody to Michael Jordan, just because of his legitimate background, I would say Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle, who's retired now, but Kurt Angle won a gold medal in 1996 in freestyle wrestling. And so Kurt is as legitimate as they come as far as a shooter, meaning a real wrestler. And so Kurt, when he came to WWE, he came in, they were thinking like, oh, we're going to package him as this, superhero babyface. He's going to be popular. Babyface is a good guy. Heel is a bad guy. So he came in and it's like, they were trying to mold him into this, babyface, good guy character. And so he would talk about like, well, I've won gold medals and I've done this. And so they saw like, oh my God, everybody hates Kurt when he talks like this. He's a natural heel. He's a natural bad guy. So he came in as a character and a unique character, presenting himself as a good guy and hated by the crowd as a bad guy. Huh. And even though his intentions were genuine, but then, he would do slimy stuff during matches. But Kurt Angle, I've heard just anecdotally that no one took to wrestling faster because he wasn't young. He was already in his late 20s. So he already had a legitimate background in Greco-Roman wrestling and freestyle wrestling. And so he came into sports entertainment, professional wrestling, which is very different. And because he's just this insanely special, gifted, once in a lifetime athlete, he took to it immediately and was like taken to the mat like he had been doing it for 10 years. So very quickly he was ready for the main roster. And when he debuted, it wasn't but a year or a year and a half before he was holding the world title. And Kurt was a guy that, whether you had him booked to win a match or lose a match, whether he was a comedy character or he was a badass, legitimate, scary heel bad guy, he could do anything. And that versatility plus that legitimate sports background, I think Kurt Angle is probably the Michael Jordan of wrestling. But like a Mount Rushmore, I mean, I have so many favorites over the years, so many different eras. I tend to like the wrestlers that are on the smaller side because they just can do more. There's generally more athleticism from them. Undertaker, I think, is one of the legitimate exceptions because he was able to do so much and he made the little guys look great. There have been stars that have hit hot for a little while and then burned out quickly that they weren't around for very long, like Dave Bautista, who's become a very competent actor. Probably the best of all the wrestling actors. Cena's good, Rock is good, but I don't think anyone would argue that if you see John Cena or you see The Rock in a movie, you're seeing John Cena or The Rock, no matter who they're playing.
Oh yeah, good point.
But Dave Bautista has really worked on his acting and he's a gigantic guy. So he's impossible to hide, but he's done so much where he really feels uniquely different in the characters that he plays. And he's very funny. And I like that his character Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy has been like a hero to the autistic because of his character is it doesn't get subtlety and doesn't get like humor or sarcasm. And so because he's not good at reading
Described half my
cues.
family.
Yeah, well, that
Oh wait, that's
character.
my humor. Sorry.
Where I mean, in stand up, we're all a little autistic, or a
Good
lot in
point.
some cases. But Dave is a great actor. Dave was a really great wrestler. I got to watch him wrestle live when he was at the top of his game at WWE, and he was as popular as anybody ever was. But he was only there for a few years. He had a short career. But yeah, there's the Mount Rushmore for me. I mean, Undertaker's on there. The Rock is on there. Shawn Michaels, Heartbreak Kid, he's on there. Kurt Angle's on there, and that's already 4. Man, I could name 10 more. It's very very hard.
Well,
and,
you're a
and,
fan. I
and
couldn't
like
ask you to limit yourself.
well, like stand up, I always want to see the next big thing come down the pike. And there's like just recently, there's 2 guys that just joined the main roster. I'm like, oh, they're both great. It's so exciting to see a new wrestler debut with like a new move set, and it's a new character to throw into the already established characters. And I'm endlessly fascinated by it. So it's hard for me to pick just a few.
Well, that's a true fan. The guy cannot pick. It's like trying to ask you to pick a favorite child. It can't be done.
But one thing about you were mentioning Turnbuckles, so it's hard for you to like figure out everything. We are definitely a companion program. Like we're a companion to Monday Night Raw and to a larger extent, all of wrestling and the WWE in particular. And we're WWE focused for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we do is, first of all, there's a ton of wrestling fans that are female, and they're being completely underserved. And I love having Julie because Julie brings a fresh perspective, somebody who's worked in the business, somebody who's worked for the big company, and she's funny and she's quick. And so John Reineman and I, we've known each other for literally 20 years. Like I've known John since he was a kid. And so we have a dynamic that's very hard to get in the middle of because we've been arguing about shit for 2 decades. And so I can't think of anybody that would step into that role better than Julie. Like Julie worked with John both at the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and at WWE. So they've known each other for a bit. I never knew Julie before, and she very seamlessly just kind of stepped in the middle of us, and she adds a great dynamic. And we want to try to bring in the female audience because they're completely underserved. Most wrestling podcasts are wildly popular. There's more people listening to wrestling podcasts than watching the product right now on television, which is crazy. But it's a nostalgia audience. And it's typically old men for old men. And that's not the entire audience. And so we want to try to cull an audience of people who don't want to hear, 60-year-old guys talking about 50-year-old guys.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys do a great job with it. And like anything else, the more you do it, the better you guys flow. The more you're figuring out, you're seeing where the other host is going. You're adding on to it. You're adding points. You're adding details. I think it's cool. And I'm a lay person who's just trying to figure out what's going on for the interview. And then I end up listening to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because
thank you.
It's good. You guys do a good job.
Well, and by the way, our partners at Cloud 10, who they're our production team, we were, John and I were actually running around pitching a wrestling television show, a sitcom idea that we've been kind of putting together since the beginning of the pandemic. We originally were trying to put together something that could be made during the pandemic cheaply. And so we're both huge wrestling fans. And so we kind of had some ideas that we were spitballing back and forth. That became a formal pitch. And we went around and pitched it for a little while. And we went to, Cloud 10 is helmed by Tom Brunell and Brad Wallach. And both of them were the producers for Chelsea Lately, David Spade's show. These guys are veteran television producers, and they were just listening to our spiel. And because it was expensive to produce, and right now very little is getting produced, it's a real ghost town as far as stuff getting made. People are pitching all over the place and very little is actually getting made. These guys were just like, you know what? You guys are funny and you're genuine and you're knowledgeable. You want to just talk about wrestling every week? And so that's how that was born. Was we were pitching a television product and ended up with a podcast. And so they're both, Tom and Brad are so funny and so supportive. And like Tom is from New England, so he has that kind of like supportive plus ball breaking mentality, which that's my mindset. I've lived with that my whole life. And they bring so much to us, and we have a great tech team that does all, we're three people that are in three different parts of the country, and they make it sound like we're all in the same room. So Cloud
Yeah.
10's been fantastic, and it ends up on iHeartRadio. They're partners with iHeart. But yeah, there's the fact that we have a podcast that's produced at all, let alone by the producers of Chelsea Lately, it's bonkers to me. I pinch myself all the time. It's amazing.
Well, it's so great. I didn't even know you guys are in different parts of the country until you told me. It sounds seamless. We've listened to a million Zoom shows and remote interviews the last 2 years, and your brain knows when there's a delay. So the fact that I couldn't even notice it, I think speaks to the production of it. You guys do a good job.
Yeah, and we edit, but we edit stuff out. There's very little editing for time. There's very little getting wording closer together or anything like that. But our editing team's fantastic. There's frequent times where we get lost in flights of fancy that end up going nowhere. All of that stuff is out by the time the podcast goes out, which is great.
You see, I encourage that. I may have isolated my problem. Well, every show gets wrapped up with my patented, I'm pretty sure I own the LLC, head-to-head Rotten Tomatoes game. This is especially themed for you, though, Tommy.
Nice.
I'm going to give you two movies. You're going to try and guess which one has the higher Rotten Tomatoes game. These are movies that have a wrestler in them.
Nice.
So the way the game works is I'm going to read you a description. When you think you know the movie, you shout it out. You can score a point that way. And then, of course, whichever one has the higher score, you can get a point. But special for this one, if you can guess the wrestler in the movie, you get a point with that as well. So I have a practice one for you to try it out. So
let's go.
Let's begin. Here we go.
Shaft. Oh, wait, the game hasn't started yet.
I told you I never edit. Here's your practice one. Shout it out when you think you know the title to this movie. Set in the future of 2019, America is a totalitarian state where the favorite TV show features a game show in which prisoners must avoid brutal death.
Running Man.
From 1987, the movie is The Running Man. You
Nice.
are correct, Tommy. Do you know the wrestler in that movie?
Jesse the Body Ventura.
100%. Movie number 2, shout it out when you know it. A former wrestler takes a job as a bodyguard and child caregiver to two wealthy kids. The kids receive little attention from their father and put their energy into pranks on their babysitters. Despite initial hostility, the children and their new sitter form a bond. When the children are kidnapped, the sitter must rescue them.
Mr. Nanny?
From 1993, the movie is Mr. Nanny.
My God.
You got it. You know, I never known such a horrible movie with such a detailed description. There's a lot going on in this movie.
Well, I had to really think about it because it's like that. Like Mr. Nanny seems like a way easier thing to. But they, you know what? Way to sell the movie. And it's a really bad movie starring Terry Bollea, aka Hulk Hogan.
Yep, you nailed it. So your movies are The Running Man versus Mr. Nanny. For a practice round, which one has the higher Rotten Tomatoes score, Tommy?
That's got to be The Running Man. I mean, Mr. Nanny's got to be in the 40s.
The Running Man, 66%. Mr. Nanny, 6%. Tommy, you got it right.
6%. My goodness. That really is a Hulk Hogan movie.
I don't know if critically acclaimed would be what I would put on the box.
I think Hulk Hogan's, I think his highest Rotten Tomatoes score is probably Gremlins, the New Batch. He had a cameo in playing himself. Yeah.
He was in, somebody should do a roster. He's been a lot of little small parts and stuff. Remember Jingle All the Way? Remember he's the Santa Claus in Jingle All the Way for like 2 seconds?
I didn't know he was in that. Like, I'm a huge Schwarzenegger fan who has managed to never see Jingle All the Way. I've seen every.
Oh, it's a good Christmas movie. You got to watch it. You got a kid. You'll enjoy it.
It's on. I think it's on Disney Plus now, so I'll eventually watch it. But I love Schwarzenegger. We watched.
Funny movie.
My son and I watched
recently.
Last Action Hero the other day, and
yeah.
He liked it, but didn't love it. But I sat there like I don't know why that movie bombed. I think it was just too high concept maybe for the time. but it's so good. It's still good. And it's very, very funny. It's very silly. I don't know. I swear it's a bad movie that I swear by.
Yeah, it might be in the category of the good bad movie. It's
Mm.
so high concept. The like Arnold is good in it, but it never fully gets there. The kid is annoying. A kid can ruin a movie. A kid actor can really ruin a movie.
Yeah.
If you don't like the kid. But it is a pretty enjoyable movie.
It's fun, and Charles Dance is great. I love that. I found out years later. So Eddie Murphy never liked The Golden Child, and Charles Dance is the bad guy in that. A really young Charles Dance is the bad guy in that. And apparently, Charles Dance hated Eddie Murphy. And when you know that and watch The Golden Child now, it is very palpable. You can definitely feel it when you watch it. There's some really, really, like, you could cut the tension with a knife. But Charles Dance is always great.
All right. Are you ready for the real deal? I have 3 matchups for you. Now that you know how the game is played, Tommy.
Okay.
Round number 1. Shout it out when you think you know it.
Okay.
Aging and past his prime, a former wrestler still is raring to go on the pro wrestling circuit. After a brutal beating, he hangs up his tights and pursues a relationship with a long-in-the-tooth stripper. However, he can't resist the lure. From 2008, the movie is The Wrestler. Correct. Now, do you know the actual wrestler who was in this movie?
Oof. Oh, man. This is such a depressing movie that I've kind of blocked it out.
It is, right.
It's a really, really depressing movie. I'm not going to get this one right. I'm just going to say the Iron Sheik.
The wrestler is Ernest the Cat Miller.
Oh, big cat. Yep.
Well, you got 1 point out of that.
Oh, well.
Movie number 2. Shout it out when you know it. By day, to make ends meet any way possible, a man works as a handyman, a car dealer, and a furniture designer. But come nighttime is really when he gets to display his talents, headlining an all-male review. Seeing potential in a 19-year-old talent, he takes him under his wing and instructs him in the tricks of the trade. However, he quickly learns the doubt. From 2012, the movie is Magic Mike. You got it right, Tommy. Correct. Do you know the wrestler?
The wrestler. It's Big Sexy. Kevin Nash.
Correct. The wrestler in Magic Mike is Kevin Nash.
A 7-foot-tall stripper.
What do you think the woman to dude ratio is who saw this movie? Is it 99-1? Is it 75-25? Because I feel like a lot of people secretly saw this movie. A lot of guys secretly saw this movie. Kind of like Sex and the City. I watched a lot of Sex and the City. Never admitted to it.
I've never seen it. I know that Kevin Nash was in it because Kevin Nash is on Twitter and very funny. And I just know it. I know it because I'm a fan of Kevin Nash. But I imagine it's probably, I'd say the male audience for it is probably about 35%.
I think that's about right. And it's a good movie. So, you watch it. If movies are on cable again, it's whatever's on, you just watch.
Isn't Fluffy in that one too?
He is. I did see him on the cast.
Like the DJ or something? Yeah. I
know
know a lot about this movie that I haven't seen.
Yeah, I know. 2 guys said we'd never seen it. We seem to know a lot about this movie.
I got to move the camera away from my steelbook copy of it in the background.
Put down that Sex in the City and you play Magic Mike, goddammit. Sorry. Okay, The Wrestler versus Magic Mike. Which one has the higher Rotten Tomato score?
Oof. Man. So The Wrestler was literally an Oscar talk and Magic Mike wasn't. But The Wrestler is so goddamn depressing. I'm going to say you know what? I'm going to give it to the underdog. I'm going to say Magic Mike has the higher rating.
God, you're very conflicted on this one.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, you're going final answer. You're going Magic Mike?
Sure.
The Wrestler is fresh at 98%.
What?
Magic Mike, 79%. You know what? You voted with your heart, not your head. I did. There, Tommy.
Well, because The Wrestler is one of those movies. It's a good movie that I would never ever watch again. There's a lot of Oscar contenders are like that. Yes. They're like, okay, I will not deny that's a good film that I will never watch again if you propped my eyes open.
I was like that with the Joker. I was like, that was a pretty good movie. I never want to discuss this movie ever again. I want to watch Dude, Where's My Car to cleanse my palate. Let's never speak of this again.
Yeah, I tend to like things light too. Coda
Yeah,
was very good though this year. I did enjoy that quite a bit.
Coda fan. Yeah.
Because New
Um.
England. How could I
Oh
be? I
yeah.
saw Boston comedy legend Tony V as a bartender for 20 seconds. It's like
That's good screen time.
anytime they're filming something in the Boston area and they need like a swarthy New England guy with a thick accent, Tony V's in the movie somewhere. He's in The Town. He's in The Departed. Anytime that they're filming in town, you see Tony on camera. And he actually had a larger role in super depressing but a great film. Robin Williams, World's Greatest Dad. That's a Bob Goldthwait movie. And it's a tough watch. The longest cry I've ever had in a movie, because especially if you have kids, it's the story of a dad who his son commits suicide and autoerotic asphyxiation.
Oh, the
But
feel good movie of the year.
it's so brutal, but it's the story of him trying to piece together it's kind of like Dear Evan Hansen, but with autoerotic asphyxiation. It's him trying to like sell the concept of his son being a great kid, even though his son was a bag of shit and he was actually a good dad. And it's what it asks that question, like, what if you are in earnest a really great parent and your kid just doesn't turn out right? But it's the
What if your
story of
kid
him like
sucks?
building a legend around his kid that all comes apart at the end. And it's like, I watched it after Robin Williams died, and it's like, it is a great farewell to Robin Williams because it's one of his best roles. But man, that is a real heavy movie. And yeah, so that's
Robin Williams might have the most per capita movies to actor that are super sad.
Yeah.
He's got some real sad ones in there.
That one takes the cake. Longest cry I've ever had in a movie, and two different ones. One at the very end, which is real cathartic. The end of the movie is extremely cathartic, and I won't spoil it because it's one of those things where it's just like, it shouldn't work, but it really does. And then when he finds his son dead, Jesus, that was an ugly cry for like 15 minutes. Like I couldn't stop. It's just
Jesus.
brutal.
Somebody
But
put
it's a
on
great
Magic
film.
Mike. I need to improve my mood.
Yes. But that I bet that has a low Rotten Tomatoes score because it's a bummer.
Total bummer.
Yep.
Bummer movies. Round number 2. Here we go, Tommy. Shout it out when you know it. Movies with wrestlers in it. Best friends who operate a sewage truck idolize a pro wrestler. After their hero is dethroned in the ring, the two friends embark on a mission to help the fallen wrestler get his title back. When they track him down, however, the friends discover that the wrestler is not too keen on recapturing his former glory.
Is this Ready to Rumble?
This is from the year 2000. Ready to Rumble is the movie. Tommy, you're on fire.
Well, so this one, there's a large number of wrestlers in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether they're asking for one or any of the ones, but
you can name any wrestler in it.
Yeah. Say Sting.
Sting was in it.
Nice.
You got
Diamond Dallas Page in it.
Diamond Dallas Page was in it.
Diamond Dallas Page, my yogi. I do. So I've had back problems for years, and I do DDP yoga, and it's really good. It is really, really good, and it fixed my back. I don't have back pain anymore.
Well, you got that one right.
I have a yogi he's very broy, and he yells at you, and it for whatever reason it works for me.
Sometimes getting yelled at can really get you moving.
He's good at that. He's a master motivator, and that gravel voice will wake you up from a dead sleep.
There's no time for anxiety when you're getting yelled at.
Nope.
Next movie, yell it out when you know it. The rowdiest, meanest, and loudest bar in the south of the Mason-Dixon line hire a new bouncer to clean it up. While not looking like much, this PhD-educated bouncer proves he's more than capable. Busting heads of troublemakers turns the bar into a jumping hotspot. However, a budding romance puts him on the bad side of a cutthroat local.
Okay, this is Roadhouse.
You got that right. From 1989, the movie is Roadhouse.
Who was the wrestler? Man, a wrestler in Roadhouse? God damn. I definitely don't know it. So now I have to guess from the possibilities.
Right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Really
say
suss this one out. You got to go era. You got to go movie. Who could
hmm.
that be to formulate a guess?
I'm just gonna say George the Animal Steel.
The wrestler is Terry Funk.
Oh man, the Funker. Yeah.
He was your wrestler in Roadhouse. So your two movies, Ready to Rumble versus Roadhouse. Which one has the higher score?
Oh, Roadhouse has to have the higher score.
Ready to Rumble, 23%.
And that's too high.
Roadhouse was not a great movie.
No.
It was an era where we gave way too much creative license to David Arquette. I mean, that's on us. It's really on us. 23% for Ready to Rumble. Roadhouse, 37%. You got it right. Really should be higher. That's a low score.
Yeah, that seems very low.
I think
by
that's
the way,
a little bit of snobby critics.
David Arquette as a publicity stunt, WCW, which is now defunct. It was bought out by the WWE. WCW put their heavyweight championship on the waist of Mr. David Arquette.
How do we feel about that?
Not good. The company folded very shortly thereafter.
Serves them right.
I mean, they were struggling. Like they were the number one promotion for a while. They were beating WWF, and in the ratings, they were beating them as far as drawing. And then all of a sudden, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, WWE just hit the pedal to the metal, never looked back. WCW just did a bunch of dumb things and just kept compounding it with other dumber stuff. And then putting the belt on David Arquette wasn't the thing that killed WCW, but it's a real nice thing to point to when you look at why.
A very obvious scapegoat.
It's a very good data point.
Your final matchup, Tommy, right, the main event. Here we go. Yell it out when you know it. Due to his eccentric habits and baffling strange films, a Hollywood film director is cast out. But with the help of his devoted cast and crew.
Okay, this is Ed Wood. And this is George the Animal Steel.
You got it right. You got them both right. Ed Wood, 1994. George the Animal Steel is the wrestler in there.
Who's a dead ringer for the actor that he played.
Ed Wood, completely in black and white. Am I remembering this movie right?
Ed Wood's very good. Yeah, Ed Wood is like when Johnny Depp was still an actor. And Ed Wood is a very...
What do you mean? I thought he was a pirate.
Johnny Depp, I think, at a certain point in his career kind of fell into that trap of like, the Al Pacino trap where it's just like, I'm Al Pacino in every movie. And so Johnny Depp, and also Johnny Depp at a certain point, people kept commenting on how good he looked for his age. And that stopped being a reality, but people kept like pretending it was.
Yeah.
But Ed Wood, he's excellent in it. And Ed Wood's a very good movie. It's a weird, oddball little film. And it's one of Tim Burton's small films that I think that it's worth revisiting.
Movie number 2. In a fairy tale adventure about two young lovers, the two must battle the evils of the mythological kingdom to be reunited, based on a novel which earned a loyal audience.
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is The Princess Bride.
From 1987, the movie is The Princess Bride. You got it, Tommy. Took you a second there.
What a deceptive recap of that movie, though. It made it sound like Labyrinth or like or something.
Well, I wrote that, so I had to make it kind of.
Oh, okay.
Kind of mysterious to you.
Good job. And the wrestler is, of course, the icon, Andre the Giant.
Yep, you got that right. Andre the Giant. Point for that. Your final matchup: Ed Wood versus The Princess Bride. Take me through your thought process.
So they're two good movies, two critically acclaimed movies. But I mean, Princess Bride is a classic that's endured, and Ed Wood is just kind of a good movie that exists in the ether. I'm going to say it's The Princess Bride.
Ed Wood is fresh at 92%.
Wow.
The Princess Bride is fresh at 97%.
Yes.
Got it. You talked it through, Tommy.
Woo.
You worked your way back into it. You thought it through. You went with your head. You guessed it right.
Absolutely. I'm very, very excited.
Scored a ton of points. Well, Tommy, it's good catching up. The podcast is Turnbuckles. You can find it anywhere you listen to your finer podcasts. I listen to it on Apple. I think just recently the other day. And when does it come out? You guys are doing it weekly?
We record on Tuesdays to release on Wednesdays so that, you get your midweek wrestling fix. And we have enough formulated opinions on what's happened on the weekend and on Monday Night Raw. So you can find us. By the way, also, I gotta pimp my own stuff too. You can find me on the socials at Tommy Rico Comedy. That is TommyRicomedy. So I'm on there on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on TikTok that I haven't used yet. So if someone could give me that push. Julie is a social media manager, and she's very good at social media, and is somewhat horrified that I have not used my TikTok yet. I barely open it because every time I open TikTok on my phone, it's super loud. It just jumps at you because for whatever the sound is already on when you get on there, and I just shut it off and forget that I have it for another week.
It's like the Spencer's Gifts of apps.
Yeah. So you can find Turnbuckles on Instagram as well at Turnbuckles Pod. Please find us. Please find us. And if you like what you hear, rate and review. We're a fledgling podcast. I know we have a great production company behind us, and we have a big platform in iHeart, but we're brand new in a very crowded space. And if you like what we do, if you think that we're unique in the space, give us a shout out. Please rate and review. We'd love to have you as a regular listener, and feel free to hit us up. I mean, we're very easy to find. All three hosts: John Reinman, Julie Harrison Harney, and myself, Tommy Rico.
I listened to it. I loved it. Go listen to it, everybody.
Thank you.
Tommy, it's good talking to you, and I hope to see you out on the stage very soon.
Patrick, very same, sir. It was a great talk, and thank you so much. I meshed the other passion in my life with my other two, so stand-up, wrestling, and movies. So this was great.
I love it. Tommy, when you see me next, feel free to put me in a headlock.
Will do. I don't know how tight my grip is these days, so it'll be easy to get out. You're probably in far better shape than I.
We'll work it out. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you, sir.
That is it. That is the show. That is Tommy Rico, comedian and podcast host. His podcast show, Turnbuckles, can be listened to anywhere you find your podcast. So give it a listen. Listen to Tommy. He's got great insight. Check it out. And how about that interview? We really found out a little bit of insight into the window that is Tommy's life, which is great, and what I love to do most about these shows and interviews. Hey, don't forget 2 stand-up dates coming at you. One this month, the 24th, at Brewyard Beer Company, 7 p.m., comedy and karaoke. Gonna be a fun show. And in May 21st, 9 p.m., Flappers Comedy Club. See me doing stand-up comedy there. Both events, you can find out info from me. That's right. Come to old Patrick Ramirez. I'll tell you what's up. Or their websites as well. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're new to it, give it a subscribe. Go hear some past interviews. You're going to love it. And look out for more episodes coming. I'm always working on it. Interviews and stand-up comedy. Thank you for listening, everybody. I am Patrick Ramirez. And for Tommy Rico, I will see you next time.